Last month, a brand new pope sat down and wrote an apology for slavery, not a press release, not a statement from a department, an encyclical, one of the highest forms of teaching in the Catholic Church. And in it, Pope Leo XIV wrote, and I'm going to be very precise here because words matter, that the Vatican itself had, and I quote, intervened several times in order to regulate and legitimize forms of subjugation, and in certain cases, including the enslavement of infidels. And then he said, in the name of the Church, I sincerely ask for pardon. Now you might be thinking, okay, this is actually pretty big. That is progress. And I need you to stay right here with me because that apology, well, it came 500 years late. And it still didn't do one thing that would actually matter. I'm Santa Monique and this is Bajans Spend the Net, and today we're pulling back the curtain on the most powerful legal ghost that you have never heard of. One that started in the 15th century papal office, traveled through the Caribbean and ended up in a US Supreme Court footnote in 2005. And trust me, by the end of this video, you are going to see your history in a whole completely different way. 1452, Pope Nicholas V issues a papal bull called Dum Diversas, and in it he gives the King of Portugal the authority, and I want you to hear this language carefully, to reduce to perpetual slavery any non-Christian people he encounters. This is a spiritual contract issued in the name of God, saying that if you are not Christian, then you can be owned. 1455, another papal bull, Romanus Pontifex, doubles down the same pope, same logic, this time extending the right to then seize lands and ports and possessions of non-Christians. Now you get to 1493. Columbus has just returned from what he called a discovery, and Pope Alexander VI issues into Caetera, drawing a literal line on a map and dividing the entire non-Christian world between Spain and Portugal. Everything to the west is Spain's, everything to the east is Portugal's. Now, if you are already living on that land, according to this document, your land was terra nullius, or vacant and empty and legally invisible. 3 popes, 3 documents, and 1 general idea that if you are not a Christian, you do not fully exist. Now, in 2023, Pope Francis's Vatican issued a joint statement saying that it repudiates the Doctrine of Discovery. You want to know what repudiate is? That's it there. And that is not part of the teaching of the Catholic Church. Strong words. But here's what they didn't do. They did not formally revoke a single one of those 3 bulls. Not the Dum Diversas, not the Romanus Pontifex, and not the Caetera either. The documents that started 500 years of colonization are still sitting on the books. Critics called it disowning without rescinding. And indigenous leaders, people who had been waiting for this moment since 1992, called it woefully inadequate. And now Leo XIV 2026 apology goes a bit further. He accepted Vatican responsibility, not just individual Christian responsibility, but, and this is important, he still didn't name the bulls. He still didn't revoke them. Now, the question that you should be asking is this: why does it matter what's on the books if everyone agrees that it's wrong?
Hold that thought.
Because the answer is going to take us somewhere that you may not expect. Before Barbados was Barbados, it had a name, Ichirouganaim. This is an Arawak name, and it translates roughly to red land with white teeth, the red soil, the white coral reefs. Our ancestors named the place because of what they saw, because of what they knew. The name Barbados came a bit later because of the Portuguese from around 1536. Os Barbados, the bearded ones, most likely referring to the long hanging roots of the bearded fig tree, etc., etc. You know how that story did go. The point is that the Ichirouganaim people had named the land after itself, like proper. And then the doctrine arrived. By the time the English first landed in Ichirouganaim in 1625, it was empty. Not because nobody had lived there, far from it, but because the Spanish slave raiders, operating under that exact same discovery logic, had been raiding these islands since the early 1500s, capturing the Arawak and the Kalinago peoples and shipping them to work on Hispaniola. So by 1541, a Spanish writer described Barbados as uninhabited. That doctrine didn't just erase our people's names, it erased the people first. And when the English arrived and built their colony on this depopulated land, that logic just changed costumes. Fast forward into 1661, the Barbados Assembly passes what becomes known as the Barbados Slave Code, the first comprehensive English law to define African people as chattel. The preamble describes enslaved Africans as heathenish, brutish, and an uncertain, dangerous kind of people. The same dehumanizing language that was baked into the Doctrine of Discovery. Different document, same theology. This code didn't just stay in Barbados, it traveled. It was copied almost word for word in 1664 Jamaica, South Carolina in 1696, Georgia, Virginia, Maryland. Historians call Barbados Britain's first slave society. It was in Barbados that was written the manual that the entire English Atlantic followed. That's not a small thing. That is the weight that our little island carries. And the men who funded it? Let me introduce you to the company behind the branding, literally, the Royal African Company, chartered in 1660 by King Charles II, rechartered in 1672, and its governor, the Duke of York, Charles's own brother, who would later then become King James II. This wasn't some rogue operation. This was the British Crown in the slave trade business. And between 1662 and 1731, the Royal African Company transported an estimated 214,000 enslaved African people to the Americas. That is the Royal African Company alone, more than any other single institution in the entire history of the transatlantic slave trade. Historians estimate over 16,000 people did not make it on that journey. Enslaved people who survived were branded DY for Duke of York or RAC for Royal African Company on their chests. Your ancestor wasn't just enslaved, they were marked as property of the crown. And in January 1663, the Duke of York personally promised the Barbados Council a delivery of 3,000 enslaved Africans per year. This wasn't just economics, my friends. This was a divinely sanctioned enterprise backed by papal logic, executed by royalty, and codified into Bajan law. Now, here is where it gets even more interesting, because you'd think that once colonialism ended, this doctrine would have just passed on with it. It didn't. It got a law degree. 1823, the United States Supreme Court hears a case called Johnson versus McIntosh. Chief Justice John Marshall needed to rule on who had the right to sell native land, and his answer, written into American law, was built entirely on the Doctrine of Discovery. He ruled that when European Christians discovered land, they gained ultimate title. Indigenous peoples retained only a right of occupancy. What? Not ownership, not sovereignty, just permission to exist on the land that legally belonged to someone else. That ruling is still first-year property law in American law schools today, by the way. But wait, that is 1823, right? That is still old history. Let me come forward a little more. 2005, Justice Ruth Ginsburg, one of the most progressive justices in modern American history, writes a Supreme Court majority opinion. And in footnote 1, she cites the what? The Doctrine of Discovery as settled operative United States law, not as history, not as something to be debated, as law. Now, the Vatican's 2023 statement, as meaningful as it was symbolically, has zero legal force in any American, Canadian, or Australian court. The doctrine didn't need the church to survive. It already had been absorbed into the legal DNA of entire nations. So when indigenous communities said that the Vatican's repudiation was only a step, this is exactly what they meant. You can disown the idea all you want, but until the courts follow, The map they drew in 1493 is still the map that the law actually uses. Imagine that. Now, let me bring this all the way back home, because this is not just history, this is happening right now. In November 2025, the CARICOM Reparations Commission made its first official mission to the United Kingdom as a collective body, led by Sir Hilary Beckles, standing in London saying formally, "You need to help clean up the mess that you created." A 2025 poll found that 85% of British adults had no idea that Britain forcibly transported over 3 million Africans across the Caribbean. 63% supported a formal apology, and 40% supported financial reparations. I know for a fact when I speak to people, to Caribbean people who lived over here for most or all their lives, when I talk with them about the stuff that I have researched and that I know and give receipts, a lot of it they don't know. And it is a shame. In Barbados, right now, the Drax Hall estate fight is still ongoing. Sir Hilary Beckles has described that land as a massive field with unmarked cemeteries. I can't say certain words because you know how it is. But anyway, he estimates that roughly 30,000 enslaved people passed away across the Drax family's estates in Barbados and Jamaica. The current owner, a former British MP, has declined to make any reparations, saying that no one can be held responsible for what happened hundreds of years ago. But the Doctrine of Discovery was cited in a 2005 court case hundreds of years ago is closer than some people would like to admit, unfortunately. Barbados went republic just 5 years ago in 2021. Mia Motley is at the table. Sir Hilary Beckles is leading the charge, and we are all watching in real time. The world is being forced to reckon with the paper trail they spent 500 years pretending it didn't exist. So, is Leo XIV's apology enough? It's certainly more than what Francis did, and it goes way further than any other pope had ever gone. And I will give credit where credit is due, acknowledging that the Vatican itself legitimized enslavement is not a small thing, okay? But an apology without revocation is like admitting that you forged a document and then you're refusing to shred it. The 3 papal bulls are still there. The doctrine is still law in courts that governs many people. Drax Hall is still being fought over, and Ichirouganaim, or island's true name, and let me know what you think about that. Barbados, Ichirouganaim. Sometimes I wonder if we shouldn't go back to that name. All the islands in the Caribbean should go back to their real names, but that's a whole other conversation. That is the name that the first peoples gave the land. It is still a footnote in most history books instead of a headline. It isn't that we're necessarily waiting for Rome or anywhere else to fix this. We are doing what we always do, right? We're going to remember, we're going to speak, and we will reclaim. And if you haven't watched my original deep dive on the Papal Bulls and thing, the one where I really break down how these documents actually worked and what they meant for Caribbean history, watch that right after this. It's up here, so in the corner, but don't touch on it yet. Don't forget to comment, like, and share, do all the things that you know that you got to do in order to make sure you know about the Papal Bulls, what they mean for our history. I mean, we need to educate ourselves, people. Educate yourself. I'm Zala Monique. Remember, respect and revive. And now you can go and watch this video here. So